Hey everyone, I'm Josh. Thanks for watching my video. Today we're going to be talking about needle exchange programs and safe injection sites. And I think one of the hot topics about this is whether or not they actually help or they just prolong the problem. And I think depending on what your experiences with that are is going to depend on what your opinion on it is. For me, my experiences are just the two AA meetings. And then as not scholarly as it is, a lot of the TV shows I watch, um, and like The Pit, shout out to The Pit TV show, as to whether or not, yeah, these actually help. First, what are these programs? So, the safe injection sites are ways for people to, it sounds bad, but to take drugs just under monitoring or under supervision. What does this do, you may ask? Well, it makes it so if something does happen, the emergency response can almost be immediate. So if someone's taking drugs right in front of you versus under a bridge in some random city with three other people, um, you can not only get to them immediately, but you're able to get them to care and potentially recovery processes along the way. And as hot as the topic is, um, it does help prevent like hepatitis C and HIV as well. Now, another topic or another program is needle exchange programs. And this is one that's kind of dicey because needle exchange programs are often seen as actually sending the issue farther down the line or not actually causing an end, but actually incentivizing taking drugs. I see where both sides are coming from, especially when you are providing the tool for it, not the drugs, but the needles themselves. The purpose of it is to give the people taking drugs um, clean, sterile needles. And what does this do? Well, it makes it so no infections are being spread. Blood is a very easy way for diseases to be transmitted, especially on a day to day basis. So, with that, by providing sterile, safe needles, yeah, sure, they're still taking drugs, but at least they're doing it with clean supplies, which um, prevents the transmission of a lot of diseases through blood. Because for drugs, a lot of people, what they do is they see random needles on the ground. They're like, oh, I just actually lost my needle yesterday on the street. Let me just take this one, put some drugs in it, and take it. And sure, while they're still doing the same things as if they had a sterile needle, they will prevent the diseases that come along with that. Now that we understand what both of the programs are, what are some elements that actually play into that? And play into that and addiction as well. Now, I think before going to both AA meetings, I viewed addiction as like, all right, why don't you just not do it? It's just like a series of bad choices, and I'm like, all right, maybe we should have just avoided that. We could have not done that. Um, but honestly, seeing both or going to both my meetings and even interviewing the nurse that I had the chance to interview, which was my brother, which is kind of cool. Um, I understand that recovery and addiction itself, there's a lot more that plays into that. And I think a few of those are both some social elements, whether or not you come from a background that is not necessarily wealthy. So maybe some of the treatment or some of the education you may have had is not as prevalent. Or maybe another thing is also psychological side. I think I'm very blessed to be able to grow up with two parents who taught me about the gospel and Jesus and what that means for me. But maybe some people who don't have that and don't have access to, um, you know, parents who are able to bring them under their wing and actually teach them about these things, that can lead to maybe some trauma or maybe some other things that maybe they're just ignorant of it. And I think some of the other things are um, whether or not maybe abuse has played a role. Sometimes people take to drugs just because they have nowhere else to turn, and it gives that short term relief, even though it has long term problems. And I think if we actually take a moment to understand some of these implications or some of these other elements, it will help to not only have compassion, but helps to actually find out what treatment should actually look like instead of just judgment and being like, all right, that's on you. You did that. And I think that was actually as I don't really want to say it, but that was almost my view beforehand of like just avoid drugs, just don't do it. And I think after talking to countless people at some of these meetings and um, getting to talk to them firsthand and hearing from their stories and their backgrounds about their experiences with addiction and their journeys with recovery, and how the struggles and trials with that have lasted over the last anywhere from 2 months to like 20 years, and how that's impacted their family, their relationship with their coworkers. They've lost their jobs. Financially, they're in a bad state. There's addiction covers so much of someone's life and affects it so negatively that if not treated, or if not on the path to recovery, only leads to worse things. And I think that's where um, that's where a big debate comes in. And honestly, sometimes I'm still torn on it. Is what is the balance of having compassion for someone, but actually having justice and accountability for them too? Because what I found out is a lot of people who relapse oftentimes sometimes just need an accountability partner, or you need someone to look up to in order to have that um, that when they're in a trial, they have someone to go to instead of to drugs. And I think with that, there's some other people who are um, they're going through it, and they're they're on their last straw, and instead of having those people, some people have those people they can turn to, but instead of having that accountability, they choose the drugs instead. And I think, once again, sometimes it's the psychological elements playing into that, so they end up doing that anyway. But I think finding that line of how do we have compassion for someone and love someone, but how do we also hold them accountable and get them on that process to recovery? And relapse is a real issue, and it doesn't mean that recovery is supposed to be a one-stop street where it's one and done, and then all right, goodbye, on to the next guy. It's There's a lot that plays into it, and I think these two meetings have helped me understand that if you really wanted to understand it, you kind of have to talk to them, and it's different from person to person. And that's the same for needle exchange programs and safe injection sites, because both of these have people that a lot of these programs can help. It has showed that disease transmission has gone down, but at the same time, it does keep people in the loop of taking drugs. So I think when you get a chance, and this is what I found out with even the interview, is when you talk one-on-one with someone and understand where they are and where they're coming from, you're able to accurately see where this person's at in their life, and whether or not they do need compassion, they do need that loving hand, they do need Christ about, just having someone next to them. Or if they're at the point where they just need someone to keep them in line, keep them accountable, just someone to check in. Sometimes that's all they need too, just a helping hand to be like, hey, can you remind me here? Do you mind if I call you once or twice? And sometimes that's all that you need. Now, in terms of faith, this can also be a very difficult subject for some people to hear. But for us to come alongside those who are struggling with addiction, it's really important to understand what would Christ do. And seeing Jesus' ministry, especially in Matthew, it's clear that we are to have love and compassion for those who are struggling, because we may not struggle with drugs, but we may struggle in similar areas, maybe with lying or stealing or any of those issues. And I remember in Matthew 22:39, it says, and a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And this is one of the most common verses to go to, but it's one we keep coming back to because it's clear that Jesus loves even the lowliest of lowliest. So we are to emulate that by coming alongside those who need help, and to love them also. Especially in Micah 6:8, where it's like, well, what else can we do? What is Jesus' will for me in terms of helping these people? Well, in Micah 6:8, it says, has he not told you, O man, what is good? And what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Sometimes justice and to love kindness, that may look different for each person, and that's okay. But keeping that at the forefront of your mind of you're trying to help this person to bring them to Christ, and you may look different, but just being persistent in pursuing God and the compassion of others, while also understanding that sometimes they need accountability, is where I believe that we are called to do. Now, once again, it sounds a lot easier said than done, because that is what addiction does to someone. In recovery and transformation, which is what Ken Dunnington harped on so much, which is what I loved, is recovery isn't just about stopping addiction. It's about transforming the person. It's about actually fixing the long-term problem and not just getting them away from drugs, not just seeking abstinence. And Kent Dunnington pointed that out so much about, in order to treat that, you have to get to the root of the problem. You have to see maybe there's trauma, abuse, there's psychological, social. There's so many things that sometimes are at play that in order to treat the long-term drug issues, you have to understand where they're at. And in order to help transform them, which is what he harped on, we have to actually get to know them, get them person to person. And I think that's what I absolutely loved. And I don't agree with the safe injection sites. I do think that they do prolong the issue, but I do see the value in them, and I think that I think they are heading in the right direction. I just think some of these programs in harm reduction do need a second hand or some support to continue on their road to recovery. Once again, thank you for listening, and hope you have a good one.